The Cell Beneath Boston, Prisoners Who Never Saw Daylight Again. True crime documentary. Before we uncover the dark secrets buried beneath Colonial Boston, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This true crime documentary reveals the terrifying real events hidden under the city streets for centuries. If you enjoy shocking prison stories, historical mysteries, and real crime documentaries from the United States, you're in the right place. Stay with us until the end, because what they discovered beneath Boston Harbor changed everything forever. The screaming started just after midnight. Men buried beneath the streets of Colonial Boston slammed their fists against wet stone walls while chains rattled through the darkness. One prisoner shouted for water, another begged for air. Somewhere deeper below the city, someone was crying so hard that the sound echoed through the underground cells like a ghost trapped beneath the earth. Then came the coughing. Loud, violent, endless. Inside the underground jail beneath Boston's old townhouse, the air had become so thick and rotten that several prisoners could barely breathe. The cell doors stayed locked. Guards above ground ignored the noise. They had heard these sounds before. But this night felt different. A young prisoner named Samuel Reed pressed his face against the iron bars, trying to pull cooler air into his lungs. Sweat covered his skin, even though the underground chamber was freezing cold. Around him, sick prisoners lay chained against damp walls covered in mold and dirt. Rats moved across the straw-covered floor, feeding on scraps left behind days earlier. Samuel looked toward the far corner of the cell. A man named Elias Turner had stopped moving. At first, nobody noticed. The prisoners were too weak, too hungry, too exhausted from weeks underground without sunlight. But then someone whispered his name. No answer. Another prisoner crawled closer and touched Elias's shoulder carefully. The body rolled slightly. Cold. The screaming started again. Several men began pounding on the doors all at once now, shouting for the guards above them. One prisoner yelled that another man was dead. Another screamed that the sickness was spreading. Chains scraped against stone as panic filled the underground chamber. Still, nobody opened the doors. Above them, Boston slept quietly beneath fresh snow. The people walking those streets had no idea what was happening directly below their feet. And when the guards finally came down into the underground prison before sunrise, they discovered something even worse waiting in the darkness. Another prisoner was missing. Nobody understood how it was possible. The cell had never been opened. The walls were solid stone. The only door remained locked from the outside. Yet somehow, one starving prisoner had vanished from beneath the city. And the truth behind that disappearance would uncover one of Colonial Boston's darkest hidden secrets. More than 300 years ago, Boston was one of the most important towns in early America. In the late 1600s, the streets were crowded with merchants, sailors, laborers, church leaders, and political officials. Wooden homes lined narrow roads lit only by lanterns and moonlight. But beneath that growing city was another world entirely, a hidden underground system of prison cells. The old Boston jail stood near the center of town, close to the townhouse where public punishments and government meetings often took place. Criminals, debtors, sailors, accused thieves, and even innocent people waiting for trial could all end up locked underground for weeks or months. These prisons were nothing like modern jails. There were no proper beds, no heating systems, no clean water. Some prisoners depended entirely on family members to bring them food.
Those with nobody outside often starved slowly in the darkness. Disease spread fast underground, and sunlight almost never reached the cells. The underground chambers were built with thick stone walls designed to trap prisoners securely beneath the streets. Moisture leaked through cracks constantly. In winter, the cold froze the floors. In summer, the air became unbearable. Many prisoners entered healthy and left sick. Others never left at all. Samuel Reed had only been inside the underground jail when the nightmare truly began. He was 19 years old, the son of a dock worker. Before his arrest, Samuel spent most days unloading ships arriving from England and the Caribbean. He lived near Boston Harbor with his widowed mother and younger sister. According to surviving court records from Colonial, Massachusetts, petty theft and accusations of stolen goods were common in Boston during this time, especially near the busy docks. Samuel claimed he had done nothing wrong, but in 1692, accusations moved quickly in Boston. A wealthy merchant reported several missing silver items from a shipping warehouse near the harbor. Witnesses claimed they saw Samuel nearby late at night. Without much investigation, local officials arrested him and placed him underground while waiting for trial. He expected to stay there only a few days. Instead, he entered a place many prisoners later described as worse than death. The underground jail already held more than 20 men when Samuel arrived. Some were violent criminals. Others were debtors who simply owed money. A few were sailors arrested after drunken fights near the harbor taverns. The prisoners slept packed tightly together. The smell hit Samuel immediately. Rotting straw, human waste, sweat, blood, and something worse underneath it all. The smell of sickness. An older prisoner named Nathaniel Pike warned Samuel during his first night underground. "Do not drink too much water," he whispered quietly. Samuel frowned. "Why?" Nathaniel looked toward the dark corner where two men lay coughing violently beneath torn blankets. "Because there is nowhere for it to go." The jail had no proper sanitation system. Buckets overflowed quickly. Rats carried disease through the chambers. Fever spread from prisoner to prisoner until entire cells became infected. And above it all stood the guards. Most jailers in Colonial Boston were poorly trained and badly paid. Some were cruel. Others simply stopped caring after years of watching prisoners suffer underground. Historical records from colonial America show that many prisons relied on fear, starvation, and harsh punishment rather than rehabilitation. The prisoners learned quickly which guards could be trusted and which ones enjoyed the suffering. One guard terrified nearly everyone underground. His name was Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves. Tall, cold-eyed, and deeply feared, Graves carried a heavy wooden baton and rarely spoke more than a few words at a time. Prisoners claimed he punished men for making too much noise, asking for extra food, or even looking directly at him. Samuel saw the violence himself on his third day underground. A prisoner named Caleb Moore begged for water after developing a fever. Graves responded by dragging him across the stone floor in chains, while other prisoners watched helplessly. The screams echoed through the underground chamber long after the beating stopped. After that night, many prisoners stopped speaking whenever Graves entered the cells. But something else frightened the prisoners even more than the guards. People were disappearing. At first, Samuel believed the stories were simply prison rumors. Men whispered quietly about prisoners taken from cells late at night and never seen again. Some believed the sick were secretly buried outside the city. Others thought certain prisoners were transferred onto ships and sold into forced labor overseas. Nobody knew the truth, because nobody ever came back. Then Samuel met Elias Turner. Elias was older than most prisoners underground, probably close to 50 years old. He had once worked aboard merchant ships traveling between Boston and England. Years of hard labor had left his hands rough and scarred. Unlike many prisoners, Elias rarely spoke loudly. But one night, after the guards finished their rounds, Elias leaned closer to Samuel inside the darkness. "There is something beneath these cells," he whispered quietly. Samuel stared at him. "What do you mean?" Elias glanced carefully toward the stairway leading above ground. "I have heard them moving below us." Samuel frowned again.
Below us? Elias nodded slowly. There are lower chambers under the prison. At first, Samuel thought the older man was losing his mind from sickness and exhaustion, but then Elias explained what he had heard during the late hours of the night. Chains dragging beneath the floor, heavy doors opening underground, voices whispering below the cells, and once, a scream. Not from inside their chamber, from somewhere deeper beneath the prison itself. Samuel tried to ignore the story, but over the following days, strange things kept happening underground. Food portions became smaller, more prisoners grew sick. One man developed a fever so severe that he began speaking nonsense in the darkness. Another prisoner claimed he saw guards carrying lanterns through a hidden hallway near the lower storage rooms. Then came the snowstorm. Boston was hit by freezing weather that trapped cold air underground for days. Ice formed near the edges of the prison walls. Water leaked constantly through cracks in the stone ceiling. Several prisoners became dangerously ill. And during the worst night of the storm, the screaming began. The same screaming that now echoed through the underground prison while Samuel pressed himself against the iron bars in terror. One prisoner was dead, another had vanished, and Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves stood silently inside the underground chamber, staring at the empty space where the missing prisoner should have been. The guards searched every inch of the locked cell. Nothing. No broken chains, no damaged walls, no tunnel, just cold stone and darkness. Then one of the guards lifted his lantern toward the floor. Near the back wall, hidden beneath dirty straw and mud, they noticed something strange, a narrow iron ring attached to the ground. And when Obadiah Graves saw it, the color drained from his face. Something hidden beneath the prison was about to be uncovered, and the men trapped underground were far closer to danger than they ever imagined. The darkness below Boston was hiding something terrible. The iron ring scraped loudly against the stone floor as Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves stepped toward it. Every prisoner inside the underground chamber went silent. The only sound left was the dripping water falling from the ceiling and the weak coughing of sick men chained against the walls. Graves lifted his lantern higher. For the first time since entering the cell, fear appeared in his face. Not anger, not cruelty, fear. Samuel Reed noticed it immediately. The prisoners exchanged nervous looks while another guard slowly pushed dirty straw aside using the end of his baton. More of the stone floor became visible beneath the lantern light. Then they saw it clearly, a square outline carved in the ground, a hidden door. One of the younger guards swallowed hard. "I thought they sealed it." Graves snapped his head toward him. "Quiet." But the damage was already done. The prisoners had heard enough. Something existed beneath the jail, something the guards had tried to hide. Nathaniel Pike moved closer beside Samuel, keeping his voice low. "You hear that?" he whispered. "There really is another chamber below us." Samuel's heart pounded painfully in his chest. The missing prisoner, had he escaped through the hidden door, or had something else happened beneath the prison?
Graves ordered all prisoners against the far wall immediately. Chains rattled as weak men dragged themselves backward across the cold floor. Several prisoners could barely move from sickness. Elias Turner remained near the body of the dead prisoner, staring silently at the hidden outline beneath the straw. He looked almost unsurprised, as if he had expected this moment all along. The guards argued quietly near the trapdoor while Samuel tried to listen carefully. "We cannot open it," one guard whispered nervously. "We have no choice now," another replied. "If the magistrates discover this, they will discover worse if we do nothing." Graves turned sharply toward the prisoners. "No one speaks of this," he warned. "Not a single word." Nobody answered. The prisoners already knew speaking rarely helped them survive underground. Graves grabbed the iron ring tightly and pulled upward with both hands. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, with a deep grinding sound, the hidden stone hatch lifted open several inches. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. Not normal cold. This air smelled old, wet, rotten, like something trapped underground for years. One prisoner covered his nose immediately. Another whispered a prayer. Samuel stared toward the opening as Graves raised his lantern carefully over the hole. Stone steps disappeared downward into blackness. Far below, nobody could see the bottom. Then came the sound. Clank, clank, clank. Chains moving somewhere underneath them. The guards froze instantly. Samuel felt every hair rise on his arms. Someone or something was down there. One of the younger guards stepped backward. "Dear God!" Graves grabbed him hard by the coat. "Hold your tongue." The sound stopped suddenly. Now the underground prison felt completely silent again. Too silent. Even the sick prisoners stopped coughing. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Graves made his decision. "You," he said, pointing toward two guards. "Lanterns, come with me." The younger guard shook his head quickly. "Sir, we should wait until morning." Graves stared him coldly. "And explained to the magistrates why a prisoner vanished from a locked cell?" The guard said nothing. Graves turned toward the prisoners once more. "If any man moves while we are below, he will be beaten." Then he disappeared down the hidden stairway. The other guards followed slowly behind him, carrying lanterns into the darkness beneath the prison. The stone hatch remained partially open. Samuel could hear their boots descending lower and lower beneath the earth. Then silence again. Nathaniel leaned closer immediately. "We need to know what is down there." Samuel whispered back carefully. "Are you mad? If there's another way out, there is no escape from this place." Nathaniel's eyes shifted toward the opening. "You heard the chains." Across the chamber, Elias Turner slowly stood from the floor despite his weakness. Samuel noticed something strange in the older prisoner's face. Recognition. Elias knew something. Before Samuel could speak, Elias quietly motioned him closer. Samuel hesitated, then moved beside him. Elias kept his voice barely above a whisper. The missing prisoner's name was Thomas Vane. Samuel nodded carefully. "He arrived here 3 months ago," Elias continued. "Before that, he worked inside the prison." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" "He carried supplies, cleaned storage rooms, sometimes helped the guards." Nathaniel joined them quietly now. "What happened to him?" Elias glanced toward the hidden stairway. "I think he discovered something beneath the jail." Samuel's stomach tightened. "What?" Elias looked toward the dead prisoner still lying motionless in the corner. "I think Thomas was trying to escape before they silenced him." The words sent fear through the chamber. Before Samuel could ask more questions, sudden shouting erupted below them. A loud crash echoed upward through the hidden stairway. Then another. The prisoners jerked toward the opening in alarm. Someone screamed underground. Not a guard, a terrified scream. Then came running footsteps. One of the guards burst back through the hidden doorway so fast he nearly fell onto the stone floor. His face looked pale beneath the lantern light. "There's somebody down there!" he shouted. Graves grabbed him roughly. "Silence!" But panic had already spread. The younger guard pointed shakily toward the darkness below. "We found chains, old cells, and blood." The prisoner stared in horror. Graves looked furious now, but beneath the anger, Samuel could see something else. The deputy jailer himself was shaken. "What else?" another guard asked nervously. The younger guard swallowed hard. "We found a tunnel leading farther beneath the city." Murmurs spread across the chamber immediately. Boston already had rumors about hidden tunnels beneath parts of the city. Smugglers sometimes used underground passages near the harbor. Old storage routes connected certain buildings underground during harsh winters. But prison tunnels? Nobody had heard of such a thing. Graves ordered the prisoners silent again before turning toward his men. "Seal the hatch." The younger guard blinked. "Sir? You heard me. But what about the prisoner?" Graves stepped closer, lowering his voice dangerously. "There are matters beneath this prison that do not concern you." The guard hesitated. That hesitation almost got him struck with the baton. "Seal it," Graves repeated. Samuel watched carefully as the guards lowered the stone hatch back into place. The grinding sound echoed across the chamber until the hidden doorway vanished once again beneath the straw-covered floor, like it never existed. But now the prisoners knew the truth. There was something beneath them, something the jailers desperately wanted hidden.
Hours passed slowly after that. No prisoner slept. The dead body of Elias Turner's friend remained covered near the wall, awaiting removal at sunrise. The smell of sickness and damp stone filled the underground chamber, while snow continued falling somewhere above the city. Samuel sat against the wall, trying to understand what he had witnessed. A hidden prison beneath the prison, secret tunnels, blood underground, and a missing prisoner connected to it all. None of it made sense, until Nathaniel quietly spoke again. "My brother disappeared here." Samuel looked toward him. "What?" Nathaniel stared into the darkness. 3 years ago. Samuel had known Nathaniel only briefly, but this was the first time the older prisoner had ever mentioned family. "He was arrested for debt," Nathaniel continued softly. "Couldn't pay taxes after his shop failed." "What happened?" Nathaniel swallowed hard. "They told my mother he died from fever underground." Samuel frowned. "But there was no body." The words hung heavily in the air. Nathaniel rubbed his chained wrist slowly. "My mother spent months asking questions. The jailers finally threatened her if she continued." Samuel's chest tightened. "You think they lied?" Nathaniel looked toward the hidden floor hatch. "I think men disappear beneath this prison." Across the chamber, Elias Turner suddenly spoke from the darkness. "They use the tunnels." Both men turned toward him. Elias coughed painfully before continuing. "Years ago, I worked the harbor routes near Long Wharf. Ships arrived at night carrying prisoners, servants, sometimes worse." Samuel moved closer. "What does that have to do with the tunnels?" Elias lowered his voice even further. "There were rumors certain prisoners were sold quietly." Nathaniel stared at him. "Sold?" "To labor camps in the Caribbean. Some never reached trial." Samuel felt cold move through his body. Forced labor across the Atlantic already existed during colonial times. Prisoners, debtors, and servants could sometimes be transported overseas for years of labor under brutal conditions. But secretly taking prisoners underground, without records, without trials? If true, it meant people beneath Boston were disappearing forever. Before anyone could speak again, heavy footsteps approached above them. The guards were returning. The cell door opened violently. Graves entered holding a folded piece of paper. His face looked harder now, more dangerous. "The magistrates arrive tomorrow morning," he announced. "Until then,
Nobody speaks of what occurred tonight. No one answered. Graves slowly scanned the prisoners one by one. Then his eyes stopped on Elias Turner. For a long moment, neither man spoke. It was clear they recognized each other. Finally, Graves stepped closer. "You should have stayed silent, Elias." The old prisoner stared back weakly. "You should have buried the truth deeper." The entire chamber froze. Graves struck Elias hard across the face with the baton. The old sailor collapsed instantly onto the stone floor. Several prisoners shouted angrily, but fear stopped them from moving further. Graves pointed toward Elias. "Put him below." Samuel's blood turned cold. Below? Two guards dragged the injured old man toward the hidden hatch beneath the straw. Elias fought weakly despite his chains. "No," Samuel heard him whisper. "Please." The guards pulled the hatch open once more. Cold air rushed upward again from the darkness beneath the prison, and for just 1 second, Samuel saw it. Far below the stairway, deep under Boston, faint lantern lights moved through another underground chamber. Not abandoned, occupied. Then Elias screamed as the guards dragged him downward into the darkness below the city. The hatch slammed shut above him, and this time, the screaming did not stop. Elias Turner's screams echoed beneath the prison long after the hatch slammed shut. The sound crawled through the stone walls like something alive. Some prisoners covered their ears, others lowered their heads silently, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Nobody wanted Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves looking at them again. Samuel Reed sat against the wall, staring at the hidden hatch beneath the dirty straw. The old sailor's voice grew weaker with every passing second. Then suddenly, silence. The underground chamber became so quiet that the prisoners could hear water dripping somewhere far below the city. Nathaniel Pike leaned toward Samuel slowly. "They're going to kill him." Samuel swallowed hard but said nothing. Deep down, he feared Nathaniel was right. Graves stood near the cell door watching the prisoners carefully. The lantern in his hand threw long shadows across the walls, making the underground chamber feel even smaller. "You will sleep," ordered Graves coldly. Nobody moved. One prisoner near the back began coughing violently again. Another wrapped shaking arms around him for warmth. The freezing air underground felt heavier now, almost poisoned by fear. Graves finally turned and climbed the stairway out of the cell. The heavy door slammed shut behind him. Locks clicked into place. The prisoners were alone again, but nothing felt the same anymore. Now they knew the prison held secrets buried beneath the streets of Boston, and worse, the guards were willing to drag prisoners into those hidden chambers in the middle of the night. Hours passed slowly. Nobody slept. Samuel watched the darkness while his mind replayed the moment Elias disappeared below the hatch. He could still hear Elias's voice begging not to be taken. Nathaniel broke the silence first. "My brother screamed like that too." Samuel looked toward him carefully. "You heard it?" Nathaniel nodded. "The night before he vanished." The words made Samuel's stomach twist painfully. How many prisoners had disappeared beneath the jail, and where had they gone? Outside, the storm above Boston finally began fading. Weak morning light slowly crept through the tiny grated opening near the ceiling, though almost none of it reached the underground chamber itself. The prisoners heard movement upstairs soon after sunrise. Voices, heavy boots, more guards than usual. Nathaniel whispered carefully, "The magistrates." Samuel sat straighter against the wall. Colonial magistrates held enormous power in Boston during the late 1600s. They controlled arrests, punishments, trials, and prison conditions. Many citizens feared them almost as much as the jails themselves. If officials were coming underground, something serious was happening. The cell door finally opened. 3 men entered carrying lanterns. The first was Graves. Behind him came 2 wealthy-looking officials dressed in dark coats lined with winter fur. Their clean clothing and polished boots stood in sharp contrast to the starving prisoners chained underground. The older official covered his nose immediately. "Good Lord," he muttered. The younger official looked disturbed by the smell. Samuel noticed both men staring toward the covered body still lying near the wall. Graves spoke quickly. "The prisoner died during the night, sir." The older magistrate frowned. "And the missing man?" Graves hesitated only briefly. "Still unaccounted for." The magistrates exchanged worried looks. Samuel listened carefully while pretending not to. "You searched the lower chambers?" the younger official asked quietly. Graves nodded once. "And?" "No sign of him." The older magistrate looked furious now. "This cannot become public." Samuel noticed several prisoners glance at one another after hearing those words. The officials were afraid. That meant whatever existed beneath the prison was worse than they admitted. The younger official slowly walked through the chamber, studying the prisoners one by one. His eyes eventually settled on Samuel. "You," he said suddenly. Samuel's heart jumped. "What is your name?" "Samuel Reed, sir." "How long have you been confined here?" 11 days. The magistrate nodded slightly. "Have you seen anything unusual?" Before Samuel could answer, Graves stepped closer. "The prisoners know nothing." But the magistrate kept staring directly at Samuel. For several dangerous seconds, Samuel considered telling the truth about the hidden tunnel, about Elias, about the screams below the prison. Then he looked toward Graves. The deputy jailer's hand rested tightly on his baton, waiting. Samuel lowered his eyes carefully. "No, sir." The magistrate studied him another moment before stepping away. Nathaniel quietly exhaled beside him. The older official turned toward Graves again. "The hatch must remain sealed." Graves nodded. "And the prisoners?" The magistrate glanced across the filthy chamber. "Transfer the sick ones upstairs before more die." Several prisoners looked shocked by those words. Transfer upstairs usually meant one thing. The fever had spread too badly underground. Boston feared disease outbreaks deeply during this period. Smallpox, yellow fever, and other deadly illnesses could spread quickly through crowded colonial towns. Underground prisons became dangerous breeding grounds for infection. The magistrates could not risk sickness spreading through the city. As guards began unlocking chains, Samuel noticed something strange. The younger magistrate kept glancing nervously toward the hidden hatch beneath the floor, almost like he feared something might come out of it. Then suddenly, bang! A loud udar echoed beneath the stone floor. Every person inside the chamber froze. Another bang followed seconds later. The sound came directly from below the hidden hatch. One guard
stumbled backward immediately. The younger magistrate turned pale. Then came screaming. Not Elias this time. Several voices, muffled, distant. Men shouting beneath the prison. The prisoners erupted into panic instantly. "They're alive down there! Open it! What's happening below us?" Graves shouted for silence, but fear had already spread through the chamber like fire. Bang! 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 The noise beneath the floor grew louder now, as if someone underground was striking the ceiling from below. The older magistrate grabbed Graves violently by the arm. "You told us the chambers were empty." Graves looked shaken for the first time. They were. The younger magistrate whispered, "Dear God." Samuel stared at the hidden hatch in horror. There were people alive beneath them, not ghosts, not rumors, real prisoners. Then came the voice, weak, barely audible through the stone, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Help us." The chamber fell completely silent. One prisoner began quietly praying. Another backed himself against the wall in terror. The voice below screamed again, "Please!" Nathaniel looked at Samuel with wide eyes. "My brother!" Graves snapped toward his guards instantly. "Seal the outer corridor now!" The guards rushed upstairs immediately. The magistrates argued in panicked whispers while more pounding echoed beneath the floor. Samuel realized something terrifying in that moment. The officials had known about the hidden chambers all along. Maybe not every detail, but enough to fear what could happen if the truth reached Boston above them. The older magistrate finally turned toward the prisoners. "What you hear does not leave this jail," he warned sharply. Nobody answered. Then the pounding suddenly stopped. So did the voices.
Silence returned once more beneath the prison. But now, the silence felt worse than before, because everyone underground knew people were trapped below them, alive. The magistrates ordered all prisoners transferred temporarily into an upper storage chamber while they investigated further. Guards unlocked chains carefully while watching the prisoners like frightened animals. Samuel helped support a feverish prisoner, barely able to walk. As they climbed the narrow stairway upward for the first time in days, cold, fresh air hit Samuel's face. He nearly collapsed from relief. The upper chamber looked slightly better than the underground cell, but still miserable. Small windows allowed pale winter light inside. Wooden walls creaked from the freezing wind outside. The prisoners were locked inside, while guards and magistrates continued arguing downstairs. Nathaniel moved beside Samuel near one of the windows. They know people are hidden below the city. Samuel nodded slowly. But why? Nathaniel lowered his voice carefully. Think about it. Debtors, sailors, prisoners with no families, men nobody would search for. Samuel's chest tightened as understanding slowly formed. They were selling them. Nathaniel nodded grimly. Forced labor was common throughout parts of the colonial world during the 1600s. Poor prisoners could disappear easily, especially those without powerful families. Boston officials might never investigate missing inmates if records vanished with them. Samuel suddenly remembered something Elias had said. Ships arriving at night, prisoners transported quietly, underground tunnels leading away from the jail. The entire system began making horrifying sense. Before Samuel could speak again, the upper chamber door burst open. A guard entered quickly. "You!" he barked, pointing towards Samuel. Samuel froze. "Come with me!" Nathaniel immediately stood. "Why?" The guard struck the wall with his baton. "Sit down!" Samuel's pulse raced painfully. "Where are you taking me?" The guard's expression remained cold. "Deputy Graves wants to ask questions." Fear swept through Samuel instantly, because prisoners called for questioning rarely returned unchanged. The guards marched him downstairs through narrow hallways lit by weak lanterns. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Then Samuel realized something terrible. They were not heading toward the main prison chamber. They were moving toward the hidden hatch. Graves waited beside it alone. The stone doorway already stood open again. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. Samuel stopped walking immediately. "No!" The guards grabbed his arms tightly. Graves stared at him silently for several long seconds. Then he spoke quietly. "You spoke with Elias Turner." Samuel's voice shook slightly. "Only briefly. What did he tell you?" "Nothing important." Graves stepped closer. "Young men often make mistakes underground, Samuel." Samuel said nothing. Graves glanced toward the open hatch. "Some mistakes are survivable." The message was clear. Tell the truth or disappear below the prison. Samuel's heart pounded as he stared into the darkness beneath Boston. Then he heard it, very faintly, a voice below the stairway, calling his name. Samuel. It was Elias Turner, still alive. And somewhere deep beneath the prison, something terrible was happening. Samuel. The voice floated up from the darkness beneath the prison like a whisper from the grave, weak, broken, but alive. Samuel Reed stared into the open hatch while cold air rose around him. The stone stairway disappeared deep below the jail, swallowed by shadows and flickering lantern light far beneath the city streets. Elias Turner was still alive. For now. Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves stood beside the opening with one hand resting on his baton. "Well?" he asked quietly. Samuel forced himself not to look afraid. "He told me nothing." Graves watched him carefully, searching his face for signs of a lie. The two guards holding Samuel tightened their grip slightly. Below them, somewhere in the hidden chambers, chains rattled faintly. Then came a cough. Several coughs, more than one prisoner. Samuel realized with horror that Elias was not alone down there. Graves slowly stepped closer until Samuel could smell tobacco and damp wool on the jailer's coat. "You are young," Graves said softly. You still have a chance to leave this prison alive." Samuel swallowed hard. But men who spread dangerous stories, Graves continued, often disappear. The threat hung heavily in the freezing air. Samuel nodded carefully. "I understand." For several seconds, Graves said nothing. Then suddenly another scream echoed from below. This one sounded different, not weak, terrified. A loud crash followed immediately after. One of the guards looked toward Graves nervously. "Sir," Graves cursed under his breath. Samuel noticed fear again in the deputy jailer's eyes. Whatever existed beneath the prison was no longer under control. Another shout rose from the darkness, then running footsteps upward. Everyone froze. The guards lifted their lanterns toward the stairway, while Graves stepped backward, gripping his baton tightly. The footsteps grew louder, faster. Someone was running towards them from below. A man suddenly appeared on the stairway out of the darkness, thin, covered in dirt, bleeding from one side of his face. Samuel barely recognized him at first. Then the prisoner collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping for air. It was Elias Turner, alive. The old sailor grabbed Graves' coat desperately. "They broke through," he choked out. Graves grabbed him hard. "Who broke through?" Elias looked at the hatch in terror. "The prisoners below." Before anyone could react, screaming erupted again beneath the stairway. Not one voice, many. Samuel heard chains dragging violently against stone walls, doors slamming, men shouting. A prison riot was happening underground. Graves shoved Elias aside immediately. "Seal the hatch!" The guards rushed forward, but it was already too late. A second prisoner burst upward from the darkness, then another. Starving men in chains stumbled onto the stairway, screaming for help and fresh air. Their skin looked pale from years without sunlight. Some wore torn prison clothing, barely hanging from their bodies. One prisoner collapsed crying onto the floor. Another attacked a guard instantly. Chaos exploded through the hallway. Lanterns crashed against walls. One guard screamed as prisoners dragged him down the stairway. Samuel backed away in horror while Graves struck wildly with his baton. "Stop them!" But there were too many now. More prisoners climbed upward from beneath the city. Some looked barely human, thin faces, long tangled hair, eyes terrified by years underground. One prisoner grabbed Samuel suddenly. "Help us," he begged desperately. "Please." Samuel stared at the man in shock. "How long were you down there?" The prisoner's lips trembled. "I don't know anymore." Then Graves struck the man across the back with the baton. The prisoner collapsed instantly. Samuel stepped backward as more guards rushed into the corridor upstairs. Fighting erupted around the hatch while prisoners tried escaping the hidden chambers beneath Boston. Nathaniel Pike appeared suddenly at the far end of the hallway. He had escaped the upper holding room during the chaos. His eyes widened as he saw the prisoners climbing from below. My God! One of the escaped prisoners grabbed Nathaniel desperately. "Please," the man whispered weakly. "They kept us underground." Nathaniel froze. The prisoner looked familiar. Too familiar. Nathaniel grabbed Thomas's shoulders. "Thomas?" The prisoner stared at him blankly at first. Then recognition slowly appeared in his exhausted face. "Nathaniel." Samuel's chest tightened. Thomas Vane, the missing prisoner. Alive. Nathaniel
Looked seconds away from breaking down. "We thought you were dead." Thomas shook violently. "They took us below." Guards shouted nearby while more prisoners flooded the corridor. Graves fought desperately to regain control, but fear had spread through the jail now. The hidden prison had been exposed, and the prisoners beneath Boston were finally escaping. Samuel pulled Nathaniel aside quickly. "We have to move." Nathaniel still stared at Thomas in disbelief. Thomas grabbed both men suddenly. "They'll kill everyone," he whispered urgently. "What?" Samuel asked. Thomas pointed shakily downward toward the hidden chambers. "There are records below, names, prisoners sold onto ships." Samuel felt cold move through his entire body. It was true. The prison had secretly transported inmates away from Boston. Nathaniel looked horrified. "My brother!" Thomas lowered his eyes. Many never survived the voyage. Before Nathaniel could respond, gunfire exploded upstairs. The sound froze everyone instantly. Colonial Boston rarely used firearms inside prisons unless absolutely necessary. Now, panic spread through the building. Guards shouted above them. More boots thundered across the floors overhead. The magistrates had called armed men. Thomas looked terrified. They cannot let the city discover this. Samuel understood immediately. If the public learned prisoners had secretly vanished beneath Boston for years, powerful officials could be destroyed. The hidden prison threatened everyone involved, which meant witnesses would become dangerous, including them. "We need to leave now," Samuel said. Nathaniel nodded quickly, but Thomas grabbed Samuel's arm. "There's another way out." Samuel stared at him. "The tunnels?" Thomas nodded weakly. "They lead toward the harbor." Samuel looked toward the chaos spreading through the jail corridors. Guards fought prisoners everywhere now. Smoke from broken lanterns drifted through the building, while terrified inmates tried escaping locked chambers. The prison was collapsing into madness. "Show us," Samuel said. Thomas led them quickly toward the hidden stairway beneath the hatch. Several prisoners climbed upward past them, begging for help, but gunshots above grew closer every second. Samuel hesitated only briefly before following Thomas downward, into the darkness beneath Boston. The hidden stairway seemed endless. Cold stone walls surrounded them, while lantern light faded behind. The air smelled wet and rotten. Water dripped constantly somewhere in the darkness. Nathaniel helped support Thomas, who could barely walk from weakness. "How long were you down here?" Samuel asked quietly. Thomas stared ahead blankly. "Months." Samuel felt sick. The underground chambers beneath the prison soon appeared ahead, and the sight stopped all three men cold. Rows of hidden cells stretched beneath the city. Iron chains hung from walls blackened by mold and dampness. Tiny cages lined narrow corridors underground. Some cells remained occupied by prisoners too weak to escape during the riot. The smell was unbearable. Disease, blood, human waste, death. Samuel covered his mouth in horror. This is impossible. But it was real, very real. Nathaniel moved slowly through the chamber, staring at the prisoners trapped behind bars. Some begged for help. Others simply stared silently with empty eyes. Thomas pointed deeper underground. "The records room is below." Samuel frowned. "Records?" Thomas nodded weakly. They kept lists of prisoners transported onto ships, fake death reports, payments. Nathaniel's face darkened with anger. "They sold people." Thomas lowered his voice. "Officials, merchants, some guards." The corruption stretched far beyond the prison itself. Boston's hidden underground jail had become part of a secret system feeding prisoners into forced labor across the Atlantic, and nobody above ground knew. A sudden scream echoed from farther below. Then another gunshot. The guards were entering the hidden prison. Thomas realized time was running out. "We need those records." Nathaniel stared at him. "Why?" "Because without proof, nobody will believe us." Another gunshot echoed closer. Thomas pointed toward a dark corridor ahead. "This way." The three men hurried deeper beneath Boston, while sounds of fighting spread through the hidden prison behind them. The lower corridors looked even older. Stone ceilings hung low overhead, while rusted chains lined the walls. Samuel noticed strange markings carved into parts of the stone. Names, dates. Prisoners had scratched them into the walls over many years underground. Some carvings ended suddenly mid-word, as if the prisoners vanished before finishing. Then Thomas stopped abruptly. There, at the end of the corridor, stood a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. Light glowed faintly beneath it. Someone was already inside. Samuel's pulse quickened. Nathaniel whispered carefully, "Who?"
Before Thomas could answer, voices echoed behind them, guards approaching fast. Samuel looked toward the door again. Whatever waited inside might expose the truth about the hidden prison beneath Boston. But footsteps closed in rapidly from behind, and somewhere above them, the city still had no idea what horrors were buried beneath its streets. Then, the wooden door slowly creaked open by itself, and a familiar voice spoke from the darkness inside. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place. I wondered how long it would take you to find this place." The voice came from inside the room beyond the iron door, calm, cold, familiar. Samuel Reed froze instantly. Nathaniel Pike stepped backward, while Thomas Vane grabbed the wall for support, breathing hard from exhaustion. Then the lantern light inside the room shifted slightly, and Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves stepped forward from the darkness. Samuel's heart nearly stopped. "How did you get here?" he whispered. Graves closed the heavy door behind him slowly. "There are more tunnels beneath Boston than you realize." The deputy jailer no longer looked like the angry prison guard from upstairs. Down here, deep beneath the city, he seemed different, older somehow, more tired, but also far more dangerous. The room behind him was filled with wooden shelves, old papers, locked boxes, and shipping ledgers stacked across a long table. Dust covered nearly everything. This was the records room Thomas had mentioned. Proof. Years of it. Nathaniel stared at the shelves in disbelief. "So it's true." Graves said nothing. Thomas suddenly stepped forward despite his weakness. "How many?" Graves asked him carefully. "Enough." Thomas's voice shook with anger. "You buried men down here." "I kept this prison alive," Graves snapped back suddenly. The sound echoed sharply through the underground chamber. For the first time, Samuel saw emotion crack through the deputy jailer's cold expression. "You think Boston cares about prisoners, debtors, sailors, thieves?" He pointed toward the ceiling above them. "The city above survives because men disappear below." Nathaniel clenched his fists. "You sold innocent people." Graves stared at him. "No, the magistrates sold them. Wealthy merchants paid for laborers. Ships arrived quietly at night. I only followed orders." Thomas laughed weakly. "You enjoyed it." Graves looked away briefly. That silence answered everything. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them, more guards approaching, lanterns moving through the tunnels. Graves suddenly grabbed several thick ledgers from the shelves and shoved them toward Samuel. "Take these." Samuel blinked in surprise. "What?" "These records contain names, payments, ship routes, prisoner transfers."
Nathaniel stared at Graves. "Why are you helping us?" The deputy jailer looked exhausted suddenly. "Because they intend to bury this entire place before sunrise." Cold fear swept through the room. Thomas whispered, "The tunnels." Graves nodded grimly. "There are storage barrels below the eastern chamber, black powder, gunpowder, enough to collapse tunnels, enough to destroy evidence forever, and everyone's still trapped underground with it." Samuel tightened his grip on the ledgers. "There are prisoners still alive below." "I know. Then help us get them out." For the first time, Graves looked genuinely conflicted. Before he could answer, a loud voice echoed from outside the room. "Graves!" The deputy jailer stiffened instantly. Another voice followed. "Seal the lower corridors now." Samuel recognized the older magistrate immediately. The officials themselves had entered the tunnels. Graves moved quickly toward the lantern hanging beside the wall. "Listen carefully," he whispered urgently. He pointed toward a narrow hallway hidden behind the record shelves. "That passage leads toward the harbor." Thomas nodded weakly. "The escape route." Graves looked directly at Samuel now. "If you want the truth to survive, leave now."
Nathaniel stared at him. "What about the prisoners?" Graves looked away again. The answer was written all over his face. He believed it was already too late. Suddenly, the wooden door behind them shook violently. "Open this door!" the magistrate shouted. Samuel's pulse raced. Graves handed Samuel another small object quickly, a rusted iron key. "What is this?" Samuel asked. "The eastern gate. It controls the final lock below the harbor tunnel." Thomas looked shocked. "You never told anyone about that." Graves gave a bitter smile. "There are many things I never told." The door shook again. "Graves!" Nathaniel grabbed Samuel's arm. "We have to move now." Samuel hesitated. Leaving meant abandoning prisoners trapped deeper underground, but staying might mean dying beneath Boston forever. Suddenly, Graves stepped toward the door. "I will delay them." Samuel stared at him. "Why?" The deputy jailer looked older than ever now, because deep down, Samuel realized something important. Obadiah Graves had lived with these horrors for years, and perhaps the guilt had finally become too heavy to carry. "Young men deserve better than this place," Graves said quietly. Then he shoved the hidden passage open behind the shelves. "Go." The prisoners hurried into the narrow corridor just as the wooden door burst open behind them. Voices exploded inside the records room. Samuel heard the magistrates shouting instantly, "You betrayed us!" Then came the sound of fighting. Nathaniel pulled Samuel deeper into the tunnel while Thomas struggled beside them. The hidden corridor sloped downward beneath Boston, completely dark except for one weak lantern Thomas carried. The walls narrowed tightly around them. Water dripped from overhead stone while distant sounds of chaos echoed behind. Then suddenly, boom! A deep explosion shook the tunnel violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Thomas nearly collapsed. "They started the powder charges," he whispered. The magistrates were destroying the hidden prison, and everyone still trapped below it. Samuel forced himself forward faster. The tunnel eventually widened into another underground chamber, unlike the prison cells above. Wooden crates lined the walls beside old barrels stamped with shipping marks from England and the Caribbean. Smuggling storage, hidden directly beneath Boston. Nathaniel looked stunned. This whole place was built for secret transport. Thomas nodded weakly. They moved prisoners through here at night. Samuel noticed iron shackles attached to several walls nearby. His stomach twisted. Human beings had been held here like cargo. Another explosion thundered through the tunnels behind them, this one much closer. The ground shook violently beneath their feet. Stone cracked somewhere in the darkness. "We need to hurry," Thomas warned. At the far end of the chamber stood a heavy iron gate blocking another tunnel beyond it. Samuel rushed forward and tried pulling it open. Locked. He quickly remembered the rusted key Graves had given him. Hands shaking, he pushed the key into the ancient lock. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then, click! The gate slowly creaked open. Cold ocean air rushed into the tunnel immediately. Fresh air. The harbor. They were close to escape. But as Samuel lifted the lantern higher, the three men suddenly froze. People stood inside the tunnel ahead. Armed men. Not guards. Dock workers. Sailors. Several carried pistols. One held a lantern towards them slowly. Thomas whispered in horror. The transport crew. The men responsible for moving prisoners onto ships. Their leader stepped forward carefully. Samuel recognized the wealthy merchant immediately, the same man who had accused him of theft weeks earlier. Edmund Raleigh, one of Boston's richest shipping traders. Raleigh smiled faintly. "Well," he said calmly, "this has become inconvenient." Nathaniel stepped backward slowly. "You were behind this." Raleigh's expression never changed. "Boston survives because difficult decisions are made. The city grows, ships sail, trade expands." He gestured toward the hidden tunnels around them. "You think this prison was built by one man alone?" Samuel realized something awful then. This corruption reached everywhere. Prison officials, merchants, guards, powerful men across Colonial Boston had all protected the system because it made them rich. Raleigh slowly raised his pistol again. "Now step aside, Graves." The deputy jailer looked at the burning torch in his hand.
"No." Raleigh's eyes narrowed. "You would destroy yourself too." Graves smiled faintly. "I buried myself in this place years ago." The chamber fell silent except for the distant rumble of collapsing tunnels. Samuel could hear faint screams far underground, prisoners still trapped below. Another explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Raleigh's men looked increasingly nervous now. One sailor whispered, "Sir, the tunnels are failing." Raleigh snapped sharply, "Quiet!" But fear had already spread among them. The hidden prison beneath Boston was collapsing piece by piece, and everyone underground risked being buried alive. Graves suddenly looked toward Samuel. "There is a dock exit beyond the eastern tunnel," he said quickly. "A small boat waits there." Raleigh stepped forward instantly. "You fool!" The merchant raised his pistol directly at Graves. Everything happened at once. Thomas screamed. Nathaniel ducked. Samuel lunged sideways. Gunfire exploded through the chamber. The pistol shot struck Graves in the chest. The deputy jailer staggered backward hard against the wall. But before Raleigh could fire again, Graves threw the burning torch directly toward the gunpowder barrels. Raleigh shouted in horror. The sailors scattered instantly. Samuel grabbed Nathaniel and Thomas. "Run!" They sprinted toward the eastern tunnel as Raleigh's men screamed behind them. Then the explosion came. The blast thundered through the underground chamber like a cannon firing beneath the city itself. Fire erupted behind them while stone cracked overhead. The shock wave slammed Samuel against the tunnel wall. Dust and smoke swallowed everything. People screamed somewhere behind them. Then darkness. For several terrifying seconds, Samuel could not hear anything except ringing in his ears. He forced himself up slowly. Nathaniel lay nearby, coughing violently. Thomas had collapsed against the tunnel wall, unconscious. Behind them, the chamber burned. Flames spread across shattered crates, while thick smoke filled the collapsing underground corridors. Samuel looked desperately for Graves. At first, he saw nothing. Then, through the smoke, he noticed a body lying near the destroyed barrels, motionless. Deputy Jailer Obadiah Graves had not survived the blast. Nathaniel stared silently at the burning chamber. He stayed behind on purpose. Samuel nodded slowly. Whatever terrible things Graves had done inside the prison, he had finally turned against the men who built it, and it had cost him his life. Another section of ceiling crashed behind them suddenly. "We have to move," Samuel shouted. The three men stumbled deeper through the eastern tunnel, while smoke chased them underground. The passage sloped upward now toward the harbor. Fresh ocean air drifted faintly through the darkness ahead, but the tunnel itself looked unstable. Large cracks spread across the ceiling. Water poured through parts of the stone walls. Boston Harbor sat directly above them. If the tunnels collapsed completely, the sea itself might flood the underground prison. Thomas slowly regained consciousness as they moved. "The boat," he whispered weakly. "Keep going." Samuel supported him carefully, while Nathaniel carried the lantern. Behind them, explosions still echoed through the hidden prison. The magistrates were likely destroying every chamber they could reach, every record, every tunnel, every secret. They wanted the truth buried forever beneath Boston. But Samuel still carried the ledgers Graves had given him. Proof survived. If they escaped. The tunnel narrowed sharply ahead before finally opening into a hidden dock chamber beneath the harbor itself.
Samuel stopped in disbelief. An underground canal stretched before them. Black water moved quietly beneath the city, while several small wooden boats floated beside old docking posts. Crates and chains lined the walls around the chamber. This was how prisoners vanished. Ships above never entered the city prison directly. Prisoners were moved secretly through underground waterways beneath Boston Harbor itself. Nathaniel stared around in horror. They built an entire hidden port. Thomas nodded weakly. Most prisoners were moved at night. Samuel looked toward one small boat tied near the edge. That must be it. The three men hurried toward the dock, but halfway there, Thomas suddenly froze. Samuel turned quickly. "What is it?" Thomas stared toward the far side of the underground canal. Someone stood there watching them. A child, thin, barefoot, maybe no older than 12. The boy looked terrified. Nathaniel whispered, "Dear God." Samuel realized immediately why the sight felt so disturbing. Children had been trapped down here too. The boy backed away slowly as they approached. "It's all right," Samuel said carefully, but the child looked too frightened to trust anyone anymore. Thomas spoke softly. "His name is Benjamin." Samuel looked at him. "You know him?" Thomas nodded sadly. "His father died in the lower cells last winter." The boy's eyes remained fixed on the lantern light. "How long has he been down here?" Nathaniel asked quietly. Thomas lowered his head. "Almost a year." Samuel felt sick. A child buried beneath the streets of Boston for nearly a year, forgotten by the world above. Another distant explosion shook the tunnels behind them suddenly. Dust fell from the ceiling again. Benjamin flinched immediately. Samuel stepped toward Benjamin gently. "We're leaving," he said gently. "Come with us." The boy hesitated, then finally nodded once. They quickly untied the small boat while water dripped heavily from the cracking ceiling overhead. Samuel noticed the underground canal led toward a narrow tunnel opening farther ahead. The harbor exit. Freedom, maybe. Nathaniel helped Thomas and Benjamin into the boat while Samuel grabbed the oars. Then, suddenly, voices echoed behind them. Men entering the dock chamber. Raleigh's surviving sailors. Samuel looked back in alarm. At least 4 armed men appeared through the smoke-filled tunnel, carrying lanterns and pistols, and Edmund Raleigh himself stepped out behind them. His face was burned from the explosion, but he was alive. Raleigh stared across the underground canal at Samuel and the others, then slowly smiled. "You really thought this place had only one exit?" The sailors spread out along the dock edges, blocking the tunnel ahead. Raleigh pointed toward Samuel. "Bring me the ledgers." Samuel tightened his grip on the oars. Those records were the only proof left. Without them, Boston's hidden prison system could disappear forever beneath the collapsing tunnels. Thomas whispered weakly, "Don't give them up." Nathaniel looked around desperately. There was nowhere to escape. The canal walls were too narrow, the sailors had weapons, and the harbor exit remained blocked. Raleigh slowly raised another pistol. Last chance. Benjamin suddenly grabbed Samuel's sleeve tightly. The frightened boy pointed toward the dark water beside the boat. At first, Samuel saw nothing. Then he noticed movement beneath the surface, a current, strong and fast, flowing beneath the dock wall itself. Thomas saw it too. His eyes widened. The flood tunnel. Samuel looked at him quickly. "What?" Thomas pointed toward the rushing water beneath the stone wall. "It connects with the harbor." Nathaniel frowned. "That opening is too small for the boat." Thomas looked directly at Samuel. "Not for us." Gunfire exploded across the underground dock before anyone could move. The shot slammed into the wooden post beside Samuel Reed's head, spraying splinters across the boat. Benjamin screamed and dropped to the floorboards instantly. "Move!" Nathaniel Pike shouted. Samuel shoved the boat backward, while Raleigh's sailors rushed along the dock edges, aiming pistols through the smoke-filled chamber. Another shot cracked through the darkness. Water splashed beside the boat. Thomas pointed desperately toward the rushing current beneath the stone wall. The flood tunnel. Samuel stared at the narrow opening. It looked impossibly small. Black water roared beneath it, vanishing into a low stone passage connected directly to Boston Harbor. "There's no room," Nathaniel yelled. "There has to be," Thomas shouted back. The ceiling groaned violently overhead. Large cracks spread across the underground dock chamber, while seawater leaked through cracks in the stone walls faster now. The tunnels were failing. Raleigh stepped closer along the dock, smoke curling around his burned face. "You cannot escape," he called calmly. But Samuel noticed something different now. Raleigh was afraid too. The wealthy merchant understood the danger around them. If the harbor tunnels collapsed completely, everyone underground would drown. Another explosion thundered somewhere deep beneath the city. This time, the
chamber shook so hard that one of the dock lanterns crashed into the water. Darkness swallowed half the room instantly. Sailors shouted in panic. Water began flooding rapidly through cracks in the walls. Thomas grabbed Samuel's arm tightly. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "The flood tunnel empties near the North Harbor rocks." Samuel looked toward the rushing water again. "If we stay here, we die." Nathaniel stared at the narrow opening, then at the armed men surrounding them. He nodded once. "Do it." Samuel took a deep breath, then shoved the boat directly toward the violent current. Raleigh shouted immediately, "No!" The sailors opened fire again. Benjamin cried out as bullets struck the water around them. The current caught the boat hard. For one terrifying second, Samuel thought the vessel would flip completely. Water poured over the sides, while the underground canal pulled them violently toward the narrow tunnel. Nathaniel grabbed Benjamin tightly. Thomas held on to the edge of the boat, coughing hard. Then the entire vessel slammed into the stone opening. Wood cracked loudly. Samuel felt himself thrown sideways as darkness swallowed them whole. The flood tunnel was barely large enough for the boat. Stone scraped violently against both sides, while freezing harbor water crashed over them. The ceiling hung so low that Samuel had to flatten himself against the bottom of the vessel. Behind them, distant gunshots echoed through the collapsing dock chamber. Then, suddenly, boom! A massive explosion ripped through the tunnels behind them. The force blasted through the flood tunnel like a storm wave. Samuel heard stone collapsing, men screaming, then roaring water. The underground prison beneath Boston was finally breaking apart. The violent wave shot the small boat forward through complete darkness. Benjamin screamed again. Nathaniel nearly lost his grip on the child. Thomas whispered weak prayers beside them while the tunnel shook around them. Samuel could not tell how long they traveled beneath the city. Seconds felt like hours. The rushing current dragged them endlessly through darkness while freezing water soaked their clothing and skin. Then, suddenly, light, a faint gray glow appeared ahead, the harbor exit. "Hold on," Samuel shouted. The boat burst violently out of the tunnel opening into Boston Harbor itself. Freezing winter air hit them immediately. The small vessel slammed against icy waves beneath the early morning sky, while gulls screamed overhead. They had escaped. For several stunned moments, nobody spoke. Samuel looked back toward the shoreline. From the harbor, Boston appeared peaceful. Smoke drifted gently from chimneys across the city, while church bells rang faintly in the distance. People above ground had no idea what horrors had existed beneath their feet only moments earlier.
Then a deep rumbling sound echoed beneath the harbor itself. The water around them suddenly shifted. Nathaniel turned in alarm. The shoreline near the old prison began shaking violently, and before their eyes, part of the underground tunnel system collapsed beneath Boston. Stone walls caved inward, sections of the harbor edge cracked apart. Water rushed downward into the hidden chambers below. Samuel realized with horror that hundreds of feet of tunnels were collapsing into the sea. Any remaining evidence underground was disappearing forever. Benjamin buried his face against Nathaniel's coat. Thomas stared silently at the sinking shoreline. So many prisoners. Samuel lowered his eyes. Many had not escaped in time. The hidden prison beneath Boston was becoming a watery grave. Suddenly, Nathaniel pointed toward the harbor docks. Look! Several official boats were already moving through the water. City guards, armed, searching. Raleigh's people had survived long enough to alert authorities above ground. Samuel quickly grabbed the oars again. We need to disappear. Thomas coughed violently beside him. We won't get far in daylight. Nathaniel looked toward the city shoreline. My cousin owns a storage shed near the North End docks. Samuel nodded quickly. Can we trust him? Nathaniel hesitated briefly. Yes. The small boat moved carefully through morning fog across the harbor, while official guard vessels searched farther south near the prison district. Boston slowly awakened around them. Merchants opened shops. Fishermen prepared boats. Citizens walked snowy streets completely unaware that a secret prison system had just collapsed beneath the city itself. Samuel could barely believe it. Only days earlier, he had been a dock worker wrongly accused of theft. Now he carried evidence exposing one of Colonial Boston's darkest crimes. The ledgers hidden beneath his soaked coat suddenly felt heavier than iron. Names, payments, ship routes, proof powerful men had secretly sold prisoners for labor across the Atlantic. If the records survived, everything could change, if they lived long enough to reveal them. Nathaniel guided the boat toward a quieter section of harbor near the north end. Fog covered much of the shoreline here, hiding them from distant patrol boats. Thomas looked terrible now. His face had turned pale from exhaustion and sickness after months underground. Samuel worried Thomas might not survive much longer. Benjamin sat silently beside them, wrapped in part of Nathaniel's coat. The boy had barely spoken since leaving the tunnels. They finally reached a narrow dock hidden between two abandoned warehouses. Nathaniel jumped out first and quickly tied the boat. Come! The group hurried through the freezing morning streets while avoiding crowded areas. Boston's narrow roads twisted between wooden buildings covered in smoke and snow. Every sound made Samuel nervous now. Every passing guard, every church bell, every shouting merchant. He kept expecting armed men to appear around the next corner. Nathaniel eventually stopped beside a weathered storage building near the docks. He knocked 3 times carefully. No answer. Then again. Finally, the door creaked open slightly. A large man with gray hair stared out suspiciously. Nathaniel? It's me, Joseph. The man quickly pulled them inside after seeing their condition. The storage shed smelled of fish nets, salt water, and damp wood. Barrels lined the walls, while a small stove burned near the back room. Joseph stared at the group in shock. Dear God, what happened to you? Nathaniel looked exhausted. There isn't much time. Samuel noticed Joseph's expression change as he saw Benjamin. A child? Thomas collapsed into a chair, coughing hard before anyone could answer. Joseph rushed forward immediately. This man needs a doctor. No doctors, Samuel said quickly. Joseph frowned. Why not? Samuel slowly removed the prison ledgers from beneath his coat. The room fell silent. Nathaniel looked toward Joseph carefully. Boston's prison system has been secretly selling prisoners. Joseph blinked in disbelief. What? Samuel handed him one of the soaked ledgers. Joseph opened it slowly. As his eyes moved across the pages, the color drained from his face. Oh my God! The records contained names of prisoners marked as dead despite being transported onto ships. Payment amounts appeared beside merchant signatures, and one name appeared repeatedly throughout the ledgers: Edmund Raleigh. Joseph looked horrified. These records could destroy half the city government. Nathaniel nodded grimly. That's why they'll kill us to recover them. Outside, church bells rang louder now as Boston fully awakened. Then, suddenly, heavy knocking slammed against the storage shed door. Everyone froze instantly. A voice shouted from outside, "City guards, open immediately!" Benjamin grabbed Samuel's arm in fear. Thomas struggled weakly to stand. Joseph looked toward the back exit nervously. "There are too many guards outside," he whispered. Samuel's pulse raced. They had been found already. Another loud bang shook the door. "Open this building!" Nathaniel looked toward Samuel. "What do we do?" Before Samuel could answer, Joseph moved fast. "This way," he whispered urgently. He grabbed the attic ladder hanging from the ceiling and pulled it downward with a loud wooden crack. Dust drifted into the air as the narrow opening above them appeared. Nathaniel looked uncertain. "That attic is too small. It connects to the old roof crawl space," Joseph replied quickly. "You can cross 3 buildings from above." Another violent crash shook the front door. The guards were almost inside. Samuel shoved the prison ledgers beneath his coat again while helping Thomas Vane toward the ladder. The old sailor looked barely conscious now, his breathing rough and uneven.
"Hurry," Samuel whispered. Joseph climbed first into the attic darkness, carrying a lantern covered with cloth to hide the light. Nathaniel pushed Benjamin upward carefully while Samuel supported Thomas from below. The front door suddenly burst halfway open downstairs. Boots thundered against wood. "Search the building." Samuel climbed through the attic opening just as shouting erupted below them. Joseph pulled the ladder upward immediately. Darkness swallowed the cramped attic space. Dust filled Samuel's nose while freezing wind crept through cracks in the roof overhead. The narrow area barely allowed them to crawl forward on hands and knees. Beneath them, guards stormed through the shed. They were here. Samuel held his breath. Benjamin pressed against Nathaniel silently, trembling with fear. Joseph motioned everyone forward carefully. "Keep low." The group crawled slowly through the dark attic while voices echoed directly beneath the wooden floorboards. One guard stopped below them. Samuel could hear boots scraping across the room under their bodies. Another guard spoke sharply. "There's nowhere else to hide." Then came silence. Samuel's pulse pounded painfully in his ears. The guard beneath them had stopped moving, listening. The attic floor creaked softly under Thomas's weight. Immediately, the guard shouted, "Above us!" Samuel's stomach dropped. Gunfire exploded upward through the ceiling boards. Wood splintered inches from Benjamin's face. "Move!" Nathaniel shouted. The group scrambled desperately through the crawl space while more shots tore through the floor behind them. Dust and broken wood filled the cramped attic as guards tried smashing upward into the ceiling. Joseph reached the far side first and kicked open a narrow wooden panel leading outside. Cold winter air burst into the attic. The rooftop. Samuel helped Benjamin through the opening while Nathaniel dragged Thomas behind them. The city spread around them beneath gray morning skies. Snow covered the rooftops of Colonial Boston while smoke drifted upward from hundreds of chimneys. Church bells echoed across the harbor, and somewhere below, armed guards flooded the streets searching for them. "Quickly," Joseph urged. The rooftops connected tightly through the crowded North End district. Narrow gaps separated most buildings, allowing movement across the old wooden structures above the streets. Samuel followed Joseph carefully across the icy roof beams while wind whipped around them. Below, people had begun gathering near the storage shed. Citizens pointed nervously as guards poured from the building carrying pistols. The entire neighborhood was waking to chaos. Nathaniel glanced downward. "They're spreading out." Samuel saw it too. More guards moved through nearby streets now, questioning dock workers and merchants. Edmund Raleigh was using the city itself to hunt them. Joseph led the group toward a taller brick building overlooking a narrow alleyway. "We can reach the church district from there," he whispered. Thomas suddenly stumbled hard. Nathaniel barely caught him before he slid from the roof edge. The old sailor coughed violently, blood staining one side of his mouth. Samuel knelt beside him immediately. "You need rest." Thomas shook his head weakly. "No time." But his face had turned dangerously pale. Months underground had destroyed his health. Benjamin stared quietly at the blood. "Is he dying?" the boy whispered. Nobody answered, because deep down they all feared the truth. Another shout rose from below suddenly. "There!" A city guard pointed toward the rooftops. More shouting followed instantly. People in the streets looked upward now. Samuel realized their escape across the roofs had been spotted. "Run!" Joseph yelled. The group rushed across the icy rooftops while guards chased below through the narrow Boston streets. Gunshots echoed upward as frightened citizens scattered out of the way. Samuel leapt across a narrow gap between buildings and nearly slipped on frozen wood. Nathaniel carried Benjamin across behind him as he helped Thomas move faster. The church district soon appeared ahead. Tall brick buildings, narrow alleys, crowded streets. If they reached the crowds, they might disappear again. But then Samuel noticed something worse. Official horse riders were arriving from the center of town. Magistrate guards, armed and organized. The search had become city-wide. Joseph suddenly stopped near the edge of another roof. There's the church. Below them stood Old North Meeting House, surrounded by narrow side streets crowded with early morning citizens. Joseph pointed toward a back alley near the churchyard. "Drop there." Samuel looked nervously. The jump seemed dangerous, but guards closed in fast behind them. Nathaniel went first, lowering himself carefully onto stacked barrels below before helping Benjamin down. Samuel assisted Thomas next. The old sailor nearly collapsed again after landing. Joseph dropped beside them last. "Hoods up," he warned quickly. "Blend into the crowd." The group moved through the narrow churchyard, trying to avoid attention. Citizens rushed around them, discussing rumors spreading across Boston already. Samuel overheard frightened whispers. Explosion near the harbor. Prison riot. Underground collapse. The truth was beginning to spread, but not the full truth. Not yet. Thomas suddenly grabbed Samuel's arm tightly. "Wait." Samuel turned. The old sailor pointed weakly toward a figure standing across the street near the church steps. A woman, middle-aged, dressed in dark winter clothing. She stared directly at Thomas in shock. "Mary," Thomas whispered. The woman covered her mouth instantly. For several seconds, neither moved. Then she hurried across the street toward them. "You're alive," she breathed. Samuel realized immediately who she was. Thomas's wife, or perhaps someone who once believed him dead. Mary grabbed Thomas's face carefully as tears filled her eyes. "They told me you died months ago." Thomas could barely speak. "They lied." Nathaniel looked around nervously. "We cannot stay here." Mary noticed the fear in their faces immediately. "What happened?" Samuel lowered his voice. "The prison beneath Boston hid secret tunnels. Prisoners were sold onto ships." Mary stared at him in disbelief. Then she noticed the ledgers beneath Samuel's coat, and suddenly her expression changed. "You have proof?" Samuel nodded carefully. Mary looked around quickly at the crowded street. "Come with me." Joseph frowned. Can she be trusted? Thomas answered immediately, "Yes." Mary led them through winding streets away from the harbor district, while city guards continued searching nearby.
Boston buzzed with fear and confusion now as rumors spread through taverns and marketplaces. Samuel noticed wanted notices already being nailed to walls. Descriptions of escaped prisoners. Their descriptions. The magistrates were moving fast. Mary finally brought them to a small printing shop hidden beside a narrow alleyway. Samuel stopped in surprise. "You own this place?" "My brother does," Mary replied, while locking the door behind them. Inside, the room smelled of ink, paper, and burning candles. A large printing press stood near the back wall, beside stacks of newspapers and public notices. Nathaniel slowly realized the importance immediately. "We can print the records." Mary nodded grimly. If the city sees those names, the magistrates cannot silence everyone. But before anyone moved, loud bells suddenly began ringing outside. Not church bells, alarm bells. The entire city was being warned. Then came shouting in the streets below. They found the printing shop. The shout echoed through the building as armed guards flooded the alley outside. Samuel Reed rushed to the window beside the printing press and froze. Edmund Raleigh stood in the snow-covered street, surrounded by city guards carrying muskets and lanterns. His burned face looked even more frightening in the cold morning light.
People nearby backed away in fear as the guards blocked both ends of the alley. Nobody was getting out easily. Raleigh looked directly toward the print shop windows, then slowly pointed upward. "There," he ordered. The guards surged toward the building entrance. Inside the shop, panic exploded instantly. Mary grabbed the prison ledgers from the table. "How did they find us so quickly?" Joseph cursed under his breath. They must have followed someone from the harbor. Nathaniel rushed toward the back room, searching desperately for another exit. There has to be another way out. Thomas Vane struggled painfully to stand from his chair. His breathing sounded worse now, rough and wet deep in his chest. Benjamin pressed against the wall silently, eyes wide with terror. Below them, the front door shook violently as guards slammed against it. "Open in the name of the magistrates!" Mary turned toward the large printing press. "We still have time." Samuel stared at her. "What?" "If we print even one copy and get it outside," she whispered, "the truth survives." Another violent crash shook the building. Wood splintered downstairs. Joseph grabbed Samuel's arm tightly. "She's right." Samuel looked toward the ledgers again. Names, payments, prisoners buried beneath Boston for years. If Raleigh destroyed those records, the hidden prison would become nothing more than rumor. But if even one printed copy reached the public, everything could change. Samuel made his decision. "Print them." Mary immediately rushed toward the press, while Joseph barred the back room door with heavy crates. Nathaniel moved beside Samuel near the front stairs. "They'll break through any second." Samuel nodded grimly. "Then we buy time." The guards smashed against the entrance again. Crack! The lower door frame split loudly. Benjamin looked terrified. Thomas pulled the boy closer protectively, despite his weakness. Mary worked fast at the press, spreading ink across the metal type with shaking hands. The sound of the machine filled the room. Clank, roll, press. Samuel had never heard a printing press sound so loud before. Outside, Raleigh shouted another order. "Break it down!" The guards rammed the door again. This time it burst partially inward. Joseph grabbed a heavy iron tool from beside the fireplace. "We cannot let them upstairs." Nathaniel nodded and armed himself with a wooden post from the wall. Samuel looked around desperately for anything useful. His eyes landed on the oil lanterns hanging near the staircase. An idea formed instantly. "Joseph," he said quickly, "do you have more lamp oil?"
Joseph pointed toward a storage barrel beside the back wall. Samuel rushed toward it. The guards downstairs had almost forced the entrance completely open now. Boots thundered below, while citizens gathered outside in growing numbers. Boston was watching. Samuel grabbed the oil barrel and dragged it toward the staircase with Nathaniel's help. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked. "If they rush upstairs, this slows them." Thomas understood immediately. Fire. Samuel nodded. The wooden building would burn fast, dangerously fast, but they were running out of choices. Mary finally pulled the first printed sheet from the press. Her face went pale. It worked. Samuel hurried toward her. The page contained names of missing prisoners, transport payments, and merchant signatures tied to the hidden tunnels beneath Boston Harbor. Proof. Real proof. Joseph stared at the sheet in disbelief. This will destroy them. Then the guards broke through downstairs completely. Heavy boots pounded inside the building. Upstairs! Samuel grabbed a heavy iron tool from beside the fireplace. "We cannot let them upstairs." Nathaniel nodded and armed himself with a wooden post from the wall. Samuel looked around desperately for anything useful. His eyes landed on the oil lanterns hanging near the staircase. An idea formed instantly. "Joseph," he said quickly, "do you have more lamp oil?" Joseph pointed toward a storage barrel beside the back wall. Samuel rushed toward it. The guards downstairs had almost forced the entrance completely open now. Boots thundered below, while citizens gathered outside in growing numbers. Boston was watching. Samuel grabbed the oil barrel and dragged it toward the staircase with Nathaniel's help. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked. "If they rush upstairs, this slows them." Thomas understood immediately. Fire. Samuel nodded. The wooden building would burn fast, dangerously fast, but they were running out of choices. Mary finally pulled the first printed sheet from the press. Her face went pale. It worked. Samuel hurried toward her. The page contained names of missing prisoners, transport payments, and merchant signatures tied to the hidden tunnels beneath Boston Harbor. Proof. Real proof. Joseph stared at the sheet in disbelief. "This will destroy them." Then the guards broke through downstairs completely. Heavy boots pounded inside the building. "Upstairs!" Samuel grabbed a heavy iron tool from beside the fireplace. "We cannot let them upstairs." Nathaniel nodded and armed himself with a wooden post from the wall. Samuel looked around desperately for anything useful. His eyes landed on the oil lanterns hanging near the staircase. An idea formed instantly. "Joseph," he said quickly, "do you have more lamp oil?" Joseph pointed toward a storage barrel beside the back wall. Samuel rushed toward it. The guards downstairs had almost forced the entrance completely open now. Boots thundered below, while citizens gathered outside in growing numbers. Boston was watching. Samuel grabbed the oil barrel and dragged it toward the staircase with Nathaniel's help. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked. "If they rush upstairs, this slows them." Thomas understood immediately. Fire. Samuel nodded. The wooden building would burn fast, dangerously fast, but they were running out of choices. Mary finally pulled the first printed sheet from the press. Her face went pale. It worked. Samuel hurried toward her. The page contained names of missing prisoners, transport payments, and merchant signatures tied to the hidden tunnels beneath Boston Harbor. Proof. Real proof. Joseph stared at the sheet in disbelief. "This will destroy them." Then the guards broke through downstairs completely. Heavy boots pounded inside the building. "Upstairs!" Samuel grabbed a heavy iron tool from beside the fireplace. "We cannot let them upstairs." Nathaniel nodded and armed himself with a wooden post from the wall. Samuel looked around desperately for anything useful. His eyes landed on the oil lanterns hanging near the staircase. An idea formed instantly. "Joseph," he said quickly, "do you have more lamp oil?" Joseph pointed toward a storage barrel beside the back wall. Samuel rushed toward it. The guards downstairs had almost forced the entrance completely open now. Boots thundered below, while citizens gathered outside in growing numbers. Boston was watching. Samuel grabbed the oil barrel and dragged it toward the staircase with Nathaniel's help. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked. "If they rush upstairs, this slows them." Thomas understood immediately. Fire. Samuel nodded. The wooden building would burn fast, dangerously fast, but they were running out of choices. Mary finally pulled the first printed sheet from the press. Her face went pale. It worked. Samuel hurried toward her. The page contained names of missing prisoners, transport payments, and merchant signatures tied to the hidden tunnels beneath Boston Harbor. Proof. Real proof. Joseph stared at the sheet in disbelief. "This will destroy them." Then the guards broke through downstairs completely. Heavy boots pounded inside the building. "Upstairs!" Samuel grabbed a heavy iron tool from beside the fireplace. "We cannot let them upstairs." Nathaniel nodded and armed himself with a wooden post from the wall. Samuel looked around desperately for anything useful. His eyes landed on the oil lanterns hanging near the staircase. An idea formed instantly. "Joseph," he said quickly, "do you have more lamp oil?" Joseph pointed toward a storage barrel beside the back wall. Samuel rushed toward it. The guards downstairs had almost forced the entrance completely open now. Boots thundered below, while citizens gathered
Outside in growing numbers, Boston was watching. Samuel grabbed the oil barrel and dragged it toward the staircase with Nathaniel's help. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked. "If they rush upstairs, this slows them." Thomas understood immediately. Fire. Samuel nodded. The wooden building would burn fast, dangerously fast, but they were running out of choices. Mary finally pulled the first printed sheet from the press. Her face went pale. It worked. Samuel hurried toward her. The page contained names of missing prisoners, transport payments, and merchant signatures tied to the hidden tunnels beneath Boston Harbor. Proof. Real proof. Joseph stared at the sheet in disbelief. "This will destroy them." Then the guards broke through downstairs completely. Heavy boots pounded inside the building. "Upstairs!" Samuel grabbed one of the lanterns and smashed it against the staircase. Oil exploded across the wood. Flames erupted instantly. The guards below shouted in surprise as fire raced along the narrow stairway. Smoke filled the building quickly. Nathaniel stared at Samuel. "You may have trapped us too." Samuel coughed through the smoke. "We need another exit now." Mary suddenly pointed upward. "The roof." Joseph nodded quickly. "There's a hatch above the storage loft." The fire spread rapidly downstairs as guards shouted in panic beneath them. Smoke rolled through the printing shop ceiling as flames consumed the staircase. Rowley's furious voice echoed from outside. "Get inside!" But the fire had slowed the assault, for now. Mary gathered as many printed pages as possible, while Samuel stuffed the original ledgers beneath his coat again. Thomas suddenly collapsed hard beside the printing press. Benjamin screamed. Nathaniel rushed toward him immediately. The old sailor coughed violently, blood spilling onto the floorboards. Samuel knelt beside him. "Thomas!" Thomas looked up weakly. "You must go." "No," Samuel said firmly. Thomas grabbed his coat tightly. "Listen to me." The room groaned as fire spread through the lower walls. Smoke thickened rapidly. Thomas's eyes moved toward Benjamin. "Protect him." Benjamin shook his head immediately. "No." Thomas managed a faint smile. "You survived below the city. Now live." Samuel realized the terrible truth. Thomas was dying. Months underground had destroyed his body long before this moment. Another crash echoed downstairs as part of the staircase collapsed into flames. The guards could no longer reach them through the front, but the fire itself would soon kill everyone inside. Joseph pulled open the roof hatch quickly. Cold winter air rushed into the burning room. "Move!" Nathaniel lifted Benjamin upward first, while Mary passed printed pages carefully through the opening. Samuel helped Thomas sit against the wall near the press. "We can carry you." Thomas shook his head weakly. No time. The flames were already reaching the ceiling beams. Smoke swallowed half the room now. Outside, citizens shouted as fire burst through the lower windows of the print shop. Rowley screamed orders from the street below. He knew the evidence might still escape. Thomas looked toward Samuel one last time. "Tell Boston what happened beneath it." Samuel's chest tightened painfully. Then Thomas shoved a folded paper into Samuel's hand. "A list," he whispered softly. "Names of the ships." Samuel stared at him. More proof. Thomas coughed hard again. "Go." Nathaniel pulled Samuel toward the roof hatch while flames spread across the printing press itself. Ink and paper caught fire instantly, filling the room with black smoke. Benjamin cried as they climbed upward. Mary looked back only once before disappearing onto the roof. Samuel was the last to leave. For one final moment, he turned toward Thomas Vane sitting beside the burning press. The old sailor gave a small nod. Then smoke swallowed him completely. Samuel climbed through the roof hatch just as the ceiling below collapsed into flames. Cold air hit them immediately. The rooftops stretched across Boston beneath gray skies, while citizens crowded the streets below, watching the fire. Rowley spotted them instantly. "There!" Guards pointed upward as Samuel and the others ran across the snowy rooftops again. But this time, something had changed. Printed pages fluttered through the air. The wind carried them from the burning shop into the crowded streets below. Citizens grabbed them in confusion. Men and women began to read the names aloud. Prisoners, payments, ship routes. People stopped moving. Faces changed. Shock spread through the crowd. Samuel realized the truth was escaping faster than Rowley could stop it. One man shouted angrily from below, "These are prisoners!" Another voice cried out, "My brother disappeared from that jail!" The streets erupted in confusion and fear. Rowley looked horrified. The secret was spreading, and Boston itself was beginning to wake up. But the guards still chased Samuel and the others across the rooftops. Gunshots echoed upward again. A bullet struck near Joseph's feet, nearly knocking him down. "This way!" he shouted. The group leapt across another narrow alley, while smoke from the burning print shop climbed into the winter sky behind them. Church bells suddenly began ringing wildly across the city. Not alarms this time, warnings. Crowds below grew larger by the minute. Citizens shouted at guards. Some pointed accusingly towards Rowley. Others waved the printed pages overhead. Boston was turning against its own officials. Nathaniel looked down in disbelief. "They believe us." Samuel clutched the ledgers tighter beneath his coat. Not yet fully.
But they soon would. Then suddenly Mary stopped running. Ahead of them, standing on the rooftop directly across the alley, was a line of armed magistrate guards waiting with raised muskets. And at their center stood the older magistrate from the prison.
His cold eyes locked directly onto Samuel. "You should have stayed beneath the city," he said quietly. "You should have stayed beneath the city." The older magistrate stood across the rooftop with armed guards lined beside him, muskets raised directly at Samuel Reed and the others. Snow drifted through the cold morning air between the buildings, while smoke from the burning print shop climbed into the Boston sky behind them. For a moment, nobody moved. The streets below were filled with shouting citizens, waving the printed prison records overhead. Church bells echoed wildly through the city, while guards struggled to control growing crowds. Boston was beginning to panic, and now Samuel and the others stood trapped above it all. Nathaniel Pike slowly stepped in front of Benjamin protectively. Joseph whispered under his breath, "We're out of roof." He was right. Behind them stretched a dangerous drop into the alley below. Ahead stood armed magistrate guards. The older magistrate removed one glove slowly, his face calm despite the chaos spreading through the city. "You have caused enough damage," he said. Samuel stared at him. "You buried prisoners beneath Boston." The magistrate's expression never changed. "Young man, cities survive because unpleasant decisions are made quietly." Nathaniel exploded with anger. "You sold innocent people." The magistrate looked almost annoyed by the accusation. Debtors, criminals, vagrants, men already forgotten by society. Benjamin tightened his grip on Nathaniel's coat. Samuel felt rage building deep inside him. The man spoke about human lives like broken tools. Below them, more citizens shouted as additional printed pages spread through the streets. The magistrate noticed it too. For the first time, worry flickered briefly in his eyes. He looked toward Samuel again. "Give me the ledgers," he said calmly, "and this ends peacefully." Samuel slowly removed the prison records from beneath his coat. The wind tugged at the soaked pages. The names inside represented years of buried crimes. Men stolen from cells, prisoners sold onto ships, children hidden underground, entire lives erased beneath Boston streets. The magistrate held out his hand. Samuel looked down toward the crowd far below. People were still reading the printed sheets aloud. More citizens gathered every second. A woman suddenly screamed from the street, "My husband vanished from that prison!" Others began shouting too. Names from the records matched missing family members across Boston. The truth could no longer be contained. The magistrate realized it. His face hardened instantly. "Enough," he snapped. The guards tightened their grip on the muskets. Joseph whispered quietly, "Samuel." Samuel's pulse pounded painfully. If he surrendered the ledgers now, the magistrates might still destroy the remaining evidence. But refusing could get them all killed. Then Benjamin suddenly stepped forward. The frightened boy looked directly at the magistrate. "You locked children underground." The rooftop fell silent. The magistrate stared at him coldly. Benjamin's voice trembled, but he kept speaking. "My father died down there." Several guards shifted uncomfortably. Even among armed men, the sight of a child survivor standing on the snowy rooftop changed something. Below them, more citizens noticed the confrontation overhead. People began pointing upward. Crowds gathered near the alley beneath the buildings. Nathaniel suddenly understood. "So do they," he whispered. Samuel looked down. The citizens below were no longer afraid. They were angry, and Boston's anger was growing fast. The magistrate saw it too. He raised one hand sharply toward his guards. Fire. Everything happened instantly. Gunshots exploded across the rooftop. Joseph screamed and fell backward, clutching his shoulder. Nathaniel pulled Benjamin down hard against the snow-covered roof. Samuel dropped behind a chimney as bullets shattered wood and brick around them. Citizens below erupted into chaos. Women screamed. Men shouted furiously at the guards. The magistrate shouted for another volley, but this time something unexpected happened. The crowd fought back. Stones flew upward from the streets. Citizens surged toward the magistrate guards gathered below the buildings. Angry voices filled the air as more printed prison sheets spread through the city. Boston itself was turning against its leaders. One guard shouted nervously, "Sir, the crowd!" "Hold the streets," the magistrate barked, but control was already slipping away. Nathaniel crawled toward Samuel through the snow. "We need to move now." Samuel looked around desperately. The rooftop fight had become total chaos. Smoke drifted across the buildings. Citizens fought guards in the streets below. Church bells continued ringing wildly through the city. And then Samuel noticed something important. Another rooftop bridge further ahead, a narrow wooden beam connecting toward the church tower. "There!" he shouted. Nathaniel helped Benjamin up, while Mary supported the wounded Joseph carefully. The group sprinted across the rooftop again as musket fire chased behind them. The magistrate screamed in fury, "Stop them!" Samuel reached the narrow wooden beam first. Below, the crowded street stretched dangerously far beneath them. One wrong step meant death, but there was no other choice. Samuel crossed first carefully through the freezing wind, while gunfire echoed behind them. Nathaniel followed with Benjamin beside him. Then Mary and Joseph came. Next, suddenly, crack. The wooden beam split beneath Joseph's weight. The wounded man slipped violently sideways. Mary grabbed his arm instantly. Joseph dangled above the crowded street below, while the beam groaned loudly. Nathaniel rushed back to help, but Joseph looked up at them with terrified eyes. "You have to let go." "No," Mary cried. The beam cracked again. It would not hold all of them. Joseph looked toward Samuel. "Protect those records." Then he released his grip. Mary screamed as Joseph fell into the alley below. The crowd scattered in horror. Samuel forced himself forward, despite the pain twisting through his chest. There was no time to stop. The magistrate guards were closing fast. The group finally reached the church tower rooftop, while citizens below continued fighting with city guards. Samuel looked back once. The older magistrate still stood across the rooftops, staring directly at him through drifting smoke. Hatred burned in the man's eyes now. He knew his secrets were dying. Samuel turned toward the church tower entrance. "This way!" They rushed downward through narrow stone stairs inside the bell tower, while bells thundered above their heads. The sound shook the entire building. Benjamin covered his ears as they descended into the crowded church below. People filled the meeting hall now, discussing the prison records spreading across Boston. Angry voices echoed through the church as citizens demanded answers from city officials. Samuel realized something important. The magistrates could no longer silence everyone. The truth had become public. Mary suddenly grabbed Samuel's arm. "Look!" At the far end of the church, several respected town leaders stood reading the printed sheets with shocked expressions. Merchants, clergy, community elders, powerful men not connected to Raleigh's prison network. Samuel walked toward them carefully and placed the original ledgers onto the wooden table before them. The church leaders stared silently at the evidence. One older minister slowly turned pale as he read the pages. "These signatures," another man whispered. "Dear God." Nathaniel stepped forward. Prisoners were buried beneath the city and sold onto ships for years. The church hall fell silent. Even the surrounding citizens stopped speaking as the truth settled over the room. Benjamin stood quietly beside Samuel, living proof of the hidden prison beneath Boston. The minister finally looked up slowly. "We will take this before the full council." Mary nodded firmly. "The city must know everything." Outside, the sounds of unrest continued growing across Boston. Guards shouted, Crowds gathered. Church bells rang endlessly through the snowy streets. The older magistrate had lost control, and Edmund Raleigh's secret prison network was collapsing with it. Hours later, by late afternoon, official arrests finally began. Some guards fled the city entirely. Several merchants disappeared before authorities could seize them. Edmund Raleigh himself vanished from Boston Harbor before sunset. But the records survived. Witnesses came forward. Families identified names of missing relatives hidden within the prison ledgers. Workers uncovered collapsed tunnel entrances near the harbor over the following weeks, and slowly, the terrible truth buried beneath Boston emerged into daylight. Not every secret was recovered. Many prisoners remained lost forever beneath the collapsed underground chambers. Some names were never found. Some bodies never returned. But for the first time, the city could no longer pretend those people never existed. Months later, Samuel stood near Boston Harbor, watching winter finally fade into spring. The damaged prison site remained sealed behind wooden barriers while investigators continued searching the collapsed tunnels. Nathaniel had taken responsibility for Benjamin, refusing to let the boy disappear into the streets alone again. Mary continued helping publish reports exposing corruption across the prison system. And Samuel himself had become something unexpected, a witness, one of the last living men to walk beneath the hidden prison below Boston. Sometimes at night, he still remembered the screams underground, the chains, the darkness, the prisoners who never saw daylight again. Those memories would never fully leave him, but neither would the truth. Because beneath the streets of Colonial Boston, hidden under stone and silence for years, real people had suffered in darkness while the city above them moved on without them. And when the underground prison finally collapsed beneath the harbor, its secrets rose to the surface at last. Even now, historians continue uncovering records of brutal prison conditions, forced labor transport, and hidden detention practices that shaped early colonial America. The underground cells beneath Boston became a reminder of how easily power can bury the truth when nobody's watching. But eventually, the darkness always finds its way into the light. If this story shocked you, don't forget to subscribe for more real true crime documentaries based on hidden events from American history. Every week, we uncover dark prison secrets, forgotten crimes, and disturbing cases that many people have never heard before. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of this story disturbed you the most. And remember, some of history's darkest crimes were hidden right beneath people's feet.